This story is about more than just a bizarre and tragic crime. It's the story of how that crime became a story, one that was told and retold to millions, changing with every new article and every new documentary. We're going to unpack how the narrative itself just took on a life of its own.
That's what Sheriff Jim Arnott said right after Gypsy Rose Blanchard, a young woman the whole world thought was severely disabled, was found safe, and her mother, Dee Dee, was found murdered. This one quote, it just hangs over everything that followed. It's a warning that the inspirational mother-daughter duo everyone loved was, well, a complete and total illusion.
So how did this whole thing get so massive? It really exploded in 3 key stages. It all kicked off with a truly shocking Facebook post. Then it was meticulously pieced together by a viral article. And finally, it became this huge HBO documentary. Each step completely changed how we all saw the case. All right, so let's rewind all the way to the beginning, to the exact moment this private family horror became a very public spectacle. And it all started with one single cryptic post on Facebook.
I mean, can you imagine scrolling through your feed and seeing this pop up on the shared Facebook page of a mother and her supposedly wheelchair-bound daughter? Friends, neighbors, they were horrified. Was it a hack? Some kind of cruel joke? The truth, as it turned out, was way, way stranger.
What happened next was just pure chaos. On one hand, you have the police issuing a standard missing persons alert. But at the same time, on Dee Dee's own Facebook account, these taunts were appearing, like, "I fucking slashed that fat pig." For everyone watching this unfold online, the two realities just did not make any sense.
And it's in all that confusion that the first version of this story really started to take shape. Not in some fancy newsroom, but across internet forums and blogs. It was driven by a totally new kind of investigator, the online sleuth.
Now listen to this. This is a quote from Erin Carr. She's the director of the big HBO documentary. And this is how she first got hooked on the story. Not from a polished news report, but from what she called a long, intense, weird, rambling blog post. That rambling post was the real starting gun.
And that so-called rambling article by MJ Pack, well, it was basically a masterclass in real-time citizen journalism. It pulled together every single thread that was bubbling up online, the Facebook theories, testimony from family members who'd been cut off, and even the very first whispers of a condition called Munchausen by Proxy. It might have seemed chaotic, but let's be real. This article created the blueprint for the entire case. It was the groundwork that all the other journalists would later follow.
But you know how it is. For an internet obsession to really go mainstream, it needs a more polished narrative. And that's where professional journalism stepped in, taking that chaotic blueprint and turning it into a national phenomenon.
Just look at this number. 4 million plus. That's how many people read Michelle Dean's article for BuzzFeed. This wasn't a ripple anymore. This was a tidal wave. This quote from filmmaker Erin Carr, it really says it all. Dean's article was so comprehensive, so well done, that Carr was actually worried there was no story left for a documentary to even tell. Dean took that online chatter the stuff Pack had first dug up, and she forged it into the definitive telling of the story. So far.
So you can really see the evolution here, right? MJ Pack's piece for Thought Catalog was the raw, speculative spark. Then Michelle Dean's BuzzFeed piece comes along, and it's this polished, investigative narrative that creates a national sensation. One lit the match, the other turned it into an absolute inferno.
So that brings up the big question. If the story had already been told so comprehensively, what could a documentary possibly add? Well, the answer was a whole new layer of storytelling. Emotional access.
Filmmaker Erin Carr started what she called a long, slow, painful process. This wasn't just about reporting anymore. It was about building trust. She wrote letters to Gypsy in jail. She built a relationship with her lawyer. She talked to family. All of it building for over a year to get the interview that would anchor her film. A 3-hour conversation with Gypsy on the very day she pleaded guilty to murder.
You can almost see it in layers. Each form of media built on the last one, adding a new kind of value. The citizen journalism, that gave us the raw facts. Then investigative journalism came in and built a clear narrative structure. But the documentary, that delivered the ultimate prize, the emotional access of hearing from Gypsy in her own words.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the start, because even the origin story of the film itself isn't a single, straightforward narrative. Not at all. You might think the path to making a huge documentary is clear-cut, a single aha. moment. But what if I told you even the discovery of the Gypsy Rose story by Erin Carr is maybe as tangled as the case itself? Let's trace those shifting paths because it's genuinely fascinating. So we have multiple accounts here. Let's start with the one Carr gave in an interview with Salon.com. Pretty clear source. In that conversation, she stated that her co-producer sent me a link to a piece about a young woman who was forced to live in a wheelchair. Simple enough. She then explicitly praised Michelle Dean, saying Dean did a fantastic job writing that piece and that it was so comprehensive.
Right. So that version gives a lot of credit to Dean's article as the spark.
Exactly. Gives the impression that Dean's article was the initial spark, the thing that set everything in motion. Seems straightforward, but then we find a distinctly different version of events. Really different. In another interview, Carr recounts being at a party with your supervising producer, Sarah Bernstein.
Okay.
Bernstein, she says, was interested in why people confess online, just sort of generally.
Yeah.
This apparently prompted Carr to immediately think, okay, I'm going to find some times where people confessed online.
So her idea, driven by the producer's interest.
Yeah, that's how this version frames it. In this telling, Carr says she then explicitly told her co-producer, Allison Byrne, to go find her something, and Allison found the Gypsy story.
Ah, so Byrne was tasked rather than initiating.
Right. And interestingly, in this version, Carr mentions reading a thought catalog piece as her starting point, but there's no mention of Michelle Dean's work being the initial discovery. Here, the initiative seems to come more from Carr's own interest in online confessions and her directing Allison. It's a very different dynamic than the first story. And just when you think, okay, maybe that's the real story, there's a third version. And this one actually appears quite consistently across multiple other interviews, places like Observer, Nightmares Conjurings, Filmmaker Magazine.
Okay, so consistency points maybe towards this one.
You'd think.
Yeah.
In these interviews, Erin Carr states that it was her co-producer, Allison Byrne, who shared a long, intense, weird, rambling blog post from Thought Catalog by MJ Pack with her.
Rambling blog post. Okay.
Yeah, we'll come back to that phrasing. But the key here is Byrne shared it. So rather than Carr telling Byrne to find something after a party conversation, it's Byrne sharing something she had already found.
So that's closer to the Salon version in terms of Byrne finding it, but it points to a different initial article, MJ Pack's, not Michelle Dean's.
Exactly. The narrative definitely shifts. It's almost as if the origin story itself has its own, evolving plot line. It's a bit confusing, honestly.
What's truly fascinating here is how these differing origin stories can emerge in interviews, especially from a documentarian's perspective. It really highlights the often complex, maybe even winding journey of discovery in true crime. Rarely does a filmmaker just stumble upon a story in a single clear moment that can be perfectly replicated in every telling.
Right. It's messy in reality.
It's usually a collaborative process with multiple people involved in bringing a complex story to a filmmaker's attention. And the narrative is how a story was found. Well, it can evolve over time. Sometimes maybe you simplify the initial discovery for the sake of a concise anecdote for an interview.
Makes sense.
Or perhaps you emphasize different aspects of the investigative process depending on the audience or the question. It's a reminder that even the story of how a story gets told has its own layers. And our memories, frankly, can shape how we recount events, even unintentionally.
That's a really sharp observation, and it brings us right to another fascinating, perhaps even, frustrating part of this deep dive, the story of MJ Pack. Because while we're talking about origins and credit, there's this critical early source that often gets overlooked, or at least feels overlooked. Despite being central to how this story broke, and apparently, according to some of Carr's accounts, how Carr herself found it. When you look closely at Carr's comments, particularly in that Observer interview we mentioned, she's quite specific about Pack's work as her initial entry point. Carr states, very directly, I heard the story when I read this thought catalog piece written by MJ Pack. Okay, clear enough.
Mm-hmm.
But then she adds, this long, intense, weird, rambling blog post.
That phrasing again, it does sound a bit dismissive.
It does, doesn't it? Especially when you compare it later. She also says, I interviewed her for the documentary, but it didn't make it in.
Wow. So the person whose article in this telling sparked the whole thing gets interviewed but cut.
Seems that way. So acknowledging it as the discovery point, but with that description, and then not including the interview, it's curious. Now, contrast that with Carr's really effusive praise for Michelle Dean's piece, remember, from the Salon.com interview.
Yeah, fantastic. So comprehensive.
Exactly. This is noteworthy because, as we just discussed, Dean's article wasn't consistently named as the initial discovery point in all of Carr's interviews. Sometimes it was Pack's.
Right.
Yet the language used to describe Dean's work is far more glowing, much more appreciative than that used for MJ Pack's piece, which, again, in one significant account, was directly credited for leading Carr to the story, even if it was labeled rambling. It's a stark contrast in how these two foundational journalistic pieces are discussed.
This really raises an important question, I think, about the significance of foundational journalism in true crime. That initial digging. Early comprehensive reporting often lays the crucial groundwork for later documentaries. It provides the initial factual basis, the public awareness.
The heavy lifting, basically.
Pretty much. And it underscores the importance of acknowledging those initial sources, particularly when their work is explicitly identified, at least sometimes, as the discovery point for a major project like Mommy Dead and Dearest. And some sources, looking back, describe MJ Pack's article as providing some of the earliest, really in-depth coverage of the case, compiling stuff from social media, news reports, even contacting family members for new details.
So real investigative work.
It feels like MJ Pack did a lot of that initial groundbreaking work, the first real deep dive into the story, and then it got picked up by others. It makes you think about how we value and attribute the labor of initial, sometimes less polished, but essential reportage, especially in today's media landscape where stories get picked up and retold so quickly.
And the original source sometimes gets lost.
Exactly. Lost in the retelling.
Absolutely. It's a valuable lesson in media literacy right there, reminding us to always look for that original spark, maybe dig a bit deeper. And speaking of sparks and complexities, let's move on to our third area of discussion. This is a deeply complex and, let's be honest, often misunderstood aspect of this case.
This is Matt Donnelly here at the RAP South by Southwest 2017 interview studio at the Plexus Lodge in Austin, Texas. We're thrilled to welcome the director and producer of HBO's Mommy Dead and Dearest. We have director Erin Carr, producer Andrew Rossi. Welcome, you guys. I understand you just had a packed premiere screening. Went very well. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean, where to begin with this incredibly complex, very American, I think, story about family and murder and social media and just all this stuff. If you just want to sort of like help us get into just the events and how you came to it.
So this is it's sort of a murder mystery that took place in the Ozarks, and it's about a young woman named Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who for the most of her life lived in a wheelchair. And because she needed it, because she had muscular dystrophy, and she didn't go to school. All she did was sort of sit at home and watch Disney films. And it turns out something really dark and evil was happening in that house. And our film explores what happened inside that house from Gypsy's perspective, but also from the people, from her family members. And it's been a pleasure to premiere in Austin. We literally just did it, and it's been thrilling, but it's also like a very sort of serious, dark film.
The event that kicks off the entire history of Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose is her murder, correct? And Facebook was sort of crucial in tipping off investigators to what had happened. Can you sort of just like tell us just about this insane?
It's interesting because we made the film for HBO. Sarah Bernstein is our supervising producer there, and Sheila Nevins, who runs HBO documentaries, was really interested in the sort of collision of the true crime genre, which is so interesting, and also sort of online stories. And Erin really is, I think, a master at telling stories in the internet space. And so the story kicked off, really, it became known when Gypsy Rose made a Facebook post that said some very horrible things, which I might not, I don't know if they can.
It's okay, we'll bleep it out.
Okay. The bitch is dead, basically about her mother, pretending to be the murderer of Dee Dee, but in fact going through some sort of strange pathological projection and trying to pretend to be another person. And of course, the movie is all about how during her entire life she had to play a different character. So it all kicks off with a Facebook post.
I mean, it's about, why we confess things online. It's the everyday sort of pedantic motion, and it's something really that just happened. Our lives take place online. And I spoke to her in prison numerous times, and, her rationale was, I wanted people to find my mom's body. But that is that's a wild way to do that. You know, I think that there's a lot of complexities with her and like sort of her motivations, and someday it might exist this reason, the next day it'll be something different. But that's what I think about on a daily basis is she did not grow up in my reality. She grew up in a completely different reality. So for me to place judgment on actions, you know, I have to be really careful about that. You know, she did not get the benefit that I had living in this society. She was trapped in a house for, you know, so many years of her life.
Wow, that's incredibly empathetic, and Munchausen by Proxy is a big component of this film too. I'm curious if you had any preconceived notions about it going in, and after spending all this time and sort of following the story, how you feel about it coming out.
I wasn't sure. I thought that maybe like Munchausen by Proxy was potentially sort of made up syndrome. You know, people needing attention. I do not feel that way now. I do not feel that way. I have seen the evidence of it. You know, I mean, like, she would shave Gypsy's head to make it look like she had cancer. Gypsy had her teeth falling out because she had to take Tegretol, which is epilepsy medicine. This is not, put her in, take a couple of pictures of her in the wheelchair. Yeah. It's like, no, she's literally sick. Let's make her sick.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what's really fascinating about the film is that there is not some sort of moral judgment. There's a recognition of the crime that occurred, the abuse that took place, and the depth of that. But on the other hand, there's, you know, I think Erin lets the characters speak for themselves. And so you have these really incredible sort of Southern Gothic portraits of Gypsy's grandparents who live in Louisiana, and her father, and everyone sort of is this village. You know, we talk about sort of it takes a village to raise a child. It also, in a way, takes a village to lead to this level of failure in someone being brought up, and that extends to the administrative organizations, the hospital system, social services, and it's just a sort of devastating accumulation of all these things.
Going through some of the notes, I think there was only one or two. Well, I think a neurologist was one of the primary people, and you have unprecedented access, I understand, to family and to this community. But when someone is respected as a neurologist is saying, "Oh my God, there are red flags everywhere," like, what is that? Is it denial? Is it sort of wanting to buy into a sort of sympathetic victim, damsel in distress sort of thing? Why you wouldn't give further investigation, especially in this country where children are just so sacred and you know, used as platforms for other issues?
I mean, that's a really great question. I think that when anybody happens upon this story, one of the first questions is, how could this have happened, and what happened with the doctors? And I really grappled with that question. And I think that, I spoke to numerous doctors. One would go on the record. They were very, very edgy about saying anything on the record. But he said, we have to believe when people say that someone is sick. We are physicians. We are treating people. We are believing they're acting in good faith. And so for when Gypsy was adopted by this system, this hospital system in St. John's, and like, what I have to say is, like, Dee Dee was really good at what she was doing. Yeah. Like, this is not like, she's going to tell a couple of people this. She had detailed notes about how to keep the con going. I mean, she was a con woman. Yeah.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I think this is as close to a portrait of pure evil you've seen in a mother that I can think of.
Which is a taboo in filmmaking, by the way.
Is it?
That's right.
Well, maybe not documentary, but
well, it's interesting because it really does. It's taking on sort of violence towards a child. But what I think what sort of recovers it from really a sadness is that Gypsy is there in the film, and she can speak for herself. And she says that it is, I believe, basically worth it for her to have gone through this experience and be free now, even in prison, to be free from the abuse of her mom.
So you said you have spoken to her, and I understand that she will be released when she's 32 years old from prison. Does she feel represented? Is she excited? Because that's a decent age she can still have a decent life, you know what I mean, coming out of that.
So Christy and Rod, who we are able to show the film, to last night. They are Gypsy's father and stepmother, respectively. And, they immediately talked to Gypsy right after. They have a close relationship. They're very much keeping an emotional sort of attachment with each other. That's what she needs. For her whole life, she was sort of abandoned and not looked after, or looked after too much by her mother. So she has a really great relationship with them. And I think she is really excited that that when she's going to get out, she'll have life, and she'll have a life, and she'll be able to be free in a certain respect that she never was when she was when she was a kid and when she was growing up.
Hopefully get some of that experience, like you said, that you were afforded. Do you have a premiere date for HBO?
Yes, it's the day after Mother's Day. So
how lovely. The day after Mother's Day. Well, congratulations. It's a wonderful film, and we really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.